For centuries, one man's journey has stood as the ultimate test of human curiosity and endurance: Marco Polo's epic trek along the Silk Road. What makes his story so extraordinary isn't just the distance he covered, but the astonishing encounters that defied belief. From witnessing cities of gold to surviving encounters with creatures thought to be pure legend, his adventures read like something out of a fantasy novel. Yet every word was real. Today, we're retracing his steps to uncover the 20 most unbelievable moments from his 24-year odyssey. You'll discover how a single Venetian merchant's travels reshaped empires, inspired explorers for generations, and introduced the medieval world to wonders beyond imagination. This isn't just history, it's the ultimate adventure story waiting to pull you in. Long before Marco Polo set foot on its winding paths, the Silk Road had already been weaving together civilizations for centuries, an intricate web of trade routes stretching from the bustling markets of Venice to the glittering courts of China. But this wasn't just a highway for silk and spices. It was a lifeline of ideas, technologies, and cultures that transformed the medieval world. When 17-year-old Marco left Venice with his father and uncle in 1271, they weren't merely merchants seeking profit, they were stepping into a crossroads of empires. The journey alone would have shattered most travelers' resolve: 15,000 miles across scorching deserts, towering mountain passes, and kingdoms whose names alone sounded like myths. Yet Marco's true fortune wasn't just surviving the trek, it was earning the trust of Kublai Khan, the Mongol ruler whose empire spanned nearly half the known world. Serving as the Khan's envoy, Marco gained unprecedented access to secrets few Europeans had ever glimpsed. Cities where gold seemed to flow like water, cultures with customs that defied belief, and innovations like paper money and coal astonishing to a Europe still clinging to feudal traditions. What made his account so extraordinary wasn't just the scale of his travels, but the way he bridged worlds. While other merchants haggled in market stalls, Marco moved through royal courts and military camps, absorbing everything from Mongol battle tactics to the whispers of palace intrigues. His travels became a mirror reflecting the Silk Road's dual nature, where commerce and conquest, diplomacy and danger were forever intertwined. And it's this vantage point perched between empires that lets us see history not as a dry record, but as the grand, unpredictable adventure it truly was. Picture this: a sea of endless dunes stretching beyond the horizon, where the heat shimmers like a mirage and the wind carries whispers that don't belong to the living. This was the Desert of Lop, Marco Polo's first true test on the Silk Road, a place so treacherous that even seasoned traders spoke of it in hushed tones. The desert wasn't just barren, it was alive with danger, where scorching daytime heat gave way to freezing nights, and sudden sandstorms could bury entire caravans without a trace. But the most chilling threat wasn't the climate, it was the legends. Travelers swore the desert was haunted, that phantom voices would call out in the darkness, mimicking the sounds of fellow travelers or distant celebrations. Marco himself wrote of hearing ghostly music and drums, as if invisible spirits were taunting the living. Some dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, while others believed it was malevolent forces trying to lead the lost to their deaths. Whether superstition or survival instinct, these tales forced caravans to take extreme precautions, tying themselves together with ropes to avoid straying, or stuffing their ears with wax to block the siren calls of the void. Yet Marco's account reveals more than just eerie folklore. His meticulous notes show how he and his party adapted to the desert's brutality, traveling by night to avoid the sun's wrath, rationing water with painful precision, and reading the stars like a map when landmarks disappeared beneath the sands. What's striking is how his observations blend practicality with wonder. He didn't just survive the Desert of Lop, He studied it, documenting everything from the shifting dunes to the strange, salt-crusted lakes that glittered like mirages. This wasn't just a trial of endurance, it was a masterclass in resilience, proving that even in the most hostile corners of the world, human ingenuity could find a way forward. Riding high on the adrenaline of surviving the Desert of Lop, Marco Polo's caravan finally reached the lush, story-rich lands of Persia, a place where reality and myth seemed to dance together under the desert sun. Here, in bustling bazaars and shadowy caravanserais, whispers swirled about a creature so colossal, so unimaginable, that even seasoned travelers hesitated to speak its name aloud, the Roc. According to local legends, this wasn't just some oversized bird. It was a force of nature, with wings so vast they blotted out the sun, and talons strong enough to pluck elephants from the earth like fruit from a tree. Marco, ever the keen observer, didn't dismiss these tales as mere fantasy. Instead, he documented them with fascination, noting how Persian traders spoke of the Roc not with skepticism but with bone-deep conviction. One account even described its feathers as longer than a palm tree, a detail so vivid it left European readers both enthralled and unnerved. But what's truly fascinating isn't just the myth itself, it's the kernel of truth buried within. Centuries later, historians and scientists have pieced together a compelling theory. The Roc might not have been pure invention. On the distant island of Madagascar, fossils reveal the existence of the Epiones, a flightless bird towering over 10 feet tall. While it couldn't carry off elephants, its eggs were large enough to fill a bathtub. Could this have been the seed of the legend? Trade routes stretched far and wide, and fragments of such creatures' remains might have fueled imaginations across continents. Yet Marco's account does more than blur the line between fact and fiction. It holds up a mirror to how medieval travelers made sense of a world still largely uncharted. For societies with no concept of paleontology, the bones of long-dead giants or the site of an enormous cassowary in distant lands could easily morph into something supernatural. The Roc wasn't just a story, it was a way to explain the unexplainable, to personify nature's awe and terror in an age when maps still held monsters at their edges. And perhaps that's the real magic of this encounter. Marco didn't just collect curiosities, he gave us a window into how wonder shapes understanding. Whether the Roc was a misremembered relic of the past or a metaphor for humanity's smallness in a vast, untamed world, one thing's certain: it cemented his reputation as a chronicler of the extraordinary, a man who dared to ask, what if? Emerging from the desert's grip, Marco Polo found himself climbing the rugged peaks of Persia, where crumbling watchtowers studded the cliffs like silent sentinels. These weren't ordinary ruins, they were the remnants of Alamut, the legendary stronghold of the Assassins, a secretive sect so feared they became known simply as the Assassins. Marco's account of their fortress reads like something from a spy thriller. He describes a hidden garden, lush with fruit trees and flowing streams, concealed within Alamut's walls. Here, the sect's leader, the Old Man of the Mountain, allegedly drugged young recruits with hashish, whisking them into this fabricated paradise only to later awaken them and claim they'd glimpsed the afterlife. The promise obedience would guarantee their return. It was psychological warfare at its most cunning, turning faith into a weapon. Historians still debate how much of Marco's tale was fact versus hearsay, but the underlying truth is chillingly real. The assassins didn't rely on armies, they wielded terror with surgical precision. A single knife in the dark, a whispered threat, their reputation alone could destabilize kingdoms. When European crusaders clashed with Muslim rulers, both sides traded stories of the sect's ruthlessness, each retelling amplifying their myth. By the time Marco arrived, fear had already done most of their work for them. What's often overlooked is the geopolitical genius behind their notoriety. In an era when empires rose and fell by the sword, the assassins mastered something far more potent: the art of perception. Their mountain fortresses weren't just hideouts, they were stages for a carefully crafted narrative. A single act of violence, amplified by rumor, could bend sultans and kings to their will without a single battlefield. Marco's retelling, though likely embellished, captures a profound medieval truth. In the shadows of the Silk Road, information was currency, and myth could be deadlier than steel. Whether his garden was real or metaphor, it reveals how easily belief could be weaponized, a lesson that echoes eerily even today. After the shadowy intrigue of Alamut's assassins, Marco Polo's journey eastward led him to a spectacle so strange it seemed ripped from a dream: the Singing Sands of Dunhuang. Just beyond China's Gobi Desert, where the earth meets the sky in a haze of gold, entire dunes would erupt into ghostly melodies as the wind carved through them. To Polo, it was sorcery written into the landscape, mountains humming hymns, their notes oscillating between low drones and piercing whistles, as if the desert itself were alive. Modern geologists have since unraveled the mystery. The singing is a rare acoustic phenomenon caused by perfectly rounded grains of sand, polished by centuries of wind, sliding in unison down the dune's steep faces. The vibrations create frequencies that can carry for miles nature's own symphonic instrument. Yet medieval travelers had no such explanations to them. The music was divine or demonic, a sign from gods or a warning from spirits. Tibetan monks believed the sands echoed the chants of buried monasteries, while Silk Road traders swore the tones predicted coming storms. What makes Polo's account so compelling isn't just the wonder he recorded, it's the insight it offers into how cultures processed the inexplicable. In Dunhuang, science and spirituality weren't opposites, they were threads in the same tapestry. Local artisans wove the dunes' songs into cave murals alongside Buddhist deities, while Arabic scholars sketched the phenomenon in manuscripts as proof of Earth's hidden harmonies. Polo, ever the bridge between worlds, didn't dismiss these interpretations. Instead, he documented them all, preserving not just a geological oddity but a snapshot of how wonder binds humanity together. This moment crystallizes a truth about the Silk Road. It wasn't just a path for goods, but a highway for ideas. A singing dune in China became a merchant's tale in Persia, a scholar's puzzle in Baghdad, and finally, a Venetian's marvel. The unknown didn't divide people. It gave them common ground, a shared language of awe that transcended borders. And perhaps that's the real magic Polo captured. Not the sands themselves, but the way they reminded every listener, from nomad to emperor, that the world still held mysteries waiting to be heard. After the eerie whispers of the Singing Sands, Marco Polo's journey took a breathtaking turn as he arrived at a place that seemed to defy reality: the city of Hangzhou. To his Venetian eyes, this wasn't just another stop on the Silk Road. It was a vision of the future. He called it the City of Heaven, and once you hear why, you'll understand why medieval Europe struggled to believe his accounts. At the heart of Hangzhou's splendor lay the Grand Canal, a staggering feat of engineering that stretched over 1,100 miles longer than the entire coastline of Italy. Unlike the cramped, sewage-choked streets of European cities, Hangzhou's waterways were pristine highways pulsing with life. Polo described fleets of merchant ships gliding past bustling markets, their decks piled high with porcelain, tea, and silk so fine it shimmered like liquid moonlight. But the canal wasn't just for trade. It was a lifeline connecting northern and southern China with a precision that left him breathless. Locks regulated water flow, bridges arched gracefully over traffic, and a system of granaries along its banks ensured no citizen went hungry, an achievement unmatched in Polo's world. What truly set Hangzhou apart, though, wasn't just its infrastructure. It was the rhythm of daily life. Polo marveled at silk workshops where artisans unraveled cocoons into threads so delicate they seemed spun by angels. He chronicled tea houses where scholars debated philosophy over steaming cups, a ritual as refined as any European courtly dance. Even the city's night markets astonished him, lit by lanterns and alive with entertainers, a far cry from the sundown curfews back home. Every detail he recorded painted a picture of a civilization operating on a scale of sophistication that made Venice seem provincial. But here's the twist: Hangzhou wasn't just a marvel of technology, it was proof of the Silk Road's hidden power. For centuries, Europe had fixated on the road's good spices, jewels, fabrics. Yet Polo's writings revealed something far more transformative: the flow of ideas. The Grand Canal's innovations, hydraulic engineering, urban planning could have revolutionized the West centuries earlier if only Europe had been listening. Instead, his accounts were dismissed as exaggerations until explorers like Vasco da Gama finally saw the East for themselves. This moment in Polo's journey does more than showcase a city. It shatters the myth of medieval Europe's superiority. In Hangzhou, the Silk Road wasn't just connecting markets, it was broadcasting the future. And for a brief, dazzling moment, a Venetian merchant became its most astonished witness. Leaving the watery splendor of Hangzhou behind, Marco Polo stepped into a world where wealth itself had been reinvented, where fortunes weren't carried in heavy chests of gold, but in crisp, printed rectangles of mulberry bark. To a Venetian raised on the clink of coins, Kublai Khan's paper money wasn't just innovative, it was alchemy. Polo's detailed accounts of this system read like economic science fiction to medieval Europe, where the very idea of money without intrinsic value would have been heresy. The process itself was astonishing. Artisans boiled the inner bark of mulberry trees into a pulp, pressed it into sheets, and stamped each note with vermilion imperial seals, a blend of craftsmanship and state authority. But the real genius lay in the system's foundation. Every note carried the Khan's unshakable promise, allowing merchants to trade without hauling sacks of metal across continents. Polo marveled at how a single scrap of paper could buy spices in Hangzhou or horses in Samarkand, writing, "All his subjects willingly receive these notes, for wherever they go, they can reckon with them as if they were pure gold." What Europeans dismissed as exotic folly was in fact a financial revolution. While feudal lords squabbled over minting rights, China's currency was lightweight, fraud-resistant, and, crucially, controlled by a centralized authority. This wasn't just convenient, it redefined power. By mandating taxes be paid in his paper notes, Kublai Khan didn't just fund his empire, he tied its economy to his will. Polo's writings even hint at early inflation controls, with the Khan recalling old notes and issuing new ones to maintain stability, a concept Europe wouldn't grasp for centuries. The ripple effects were global. Silk Road traders, unburdened by bulky coinage, could move goods faster and farther, weaving markets from Constantinople to Canton into a single economic web. Yet Polo's most subversive observation cuts deeper. He noted how paper money democratized wealth. A merchant's slip of bark could outvalue a noble's chest of silver, proving value wasn't in metal but in trust. It's a lesson Europe painfully learned later. When Polo's tales reached Venice, bankers scoffed until, centuries on, they adopted bills of exchange to fuel the Renaissance. Today, as digital currencies echo Kublai Khan's innovation, Polo's account feels less like history and more like prophecy, proof that the boldest ideas often begin as heresies whispered along the Silk Road. Among Kublai Khan's many marvels, none left Marco Polo more perplexed than the strange black stones that fueled entire cities. In his writings, you can almost hear the disbelief in his voice as he describes how these unassuming rocks, when set aflame, burned longer and hotter than the finest Venetian firewood. To medieval Europeans, the idea of burning stones would have sounded like sorcery. Yet this was no magic, just another revolutionary secret the Silk Road had carried for centuries: coal. China's mastery of coal mining by the 13th century was nothing short of industrial genius. While European forests were being stripped bare for fuel, Chinese metallurgists used coal's intense heat to smelt steel at unprecedented scales, forging weapons and tools that outpaced the West's for generations. Polo recounts entire mountainsides honeycombed with mines where laborers cut gleaming veins of anthracite by lamplight. Even more striking, how ordinary citizens benefited. He observed peasants heating their homes with coal bricks during brutal winters, a luxury unimaginable to European farmers, who often froze when firewood ran scarce. The implications of this energy gap were profound. While Europe remained shackled to deforestation cycles, China's coal-powered kilns mass-produced porcelain and iron, fueling exports that dominated Silk Road trade. Polo's notes even hint at early environmental awareness, describing how northern cities channeled coal smoke through chimneys to reduce pollution, a crude but deliberate attempt at air quality control centuries before industrialization. What makes this moment so pivotal isn't just the resource itself, but the knowledge gap it exposed. For all Venice's wealth, its merchants had no concept of fossil fuels until Polo's account. Yet the Silk Road had been whispering this secret for ages. Arab traders referenced Chinese coal as early as the 9th century. Europe's delay in adopting it wasn't due to lack of access, but to rigid thinking. Coal required new tools, new logistics, a reimagining of what energy could be. By the time the West caught on, China had already leapfrogged ahead. Polo's fascination with those black stones captures a truth often lost in Silk Road romances. The most transformative exchanges weren't always silks or spices, but ideas hidden in plain sight. A humble rock burning unnoticed in a Khan's hearth held the spark of industrial revolutions yet to come, and for a brief moment, a Venetian merchant became the unlikely courier of that flame. The warmth of China's coal-heated palaces faded quickly as Marco Polo's caravan turned westward, climbing toward a horizon where the earth seemed to crumble into the sky. Here, where the air grew thin and the wind carried a razor's edge, lay the Pamirs, a mountain range so merciless that ancient traders called it the roof of the world. Crossing it wasn't just a test of endurance, it was a dance with death itself. Polo's notes paint a vivid picture of the ordeal. Each step at that altitude burned like fire in the lungs, as if the very atmosphere conspired to choke them. Nights plunged to temperatures so extreme that wine froze in its skins, shattering when dropped. Yet amid this brutality, nature revealed its contradictions. Glaciers glowed turquoise under the sun, while valleys hid emerald lakes untouched by time. And then there were the sheep, not the docile creatures of European pastures, but beasts straight out of legend, with horns so massive Polo swore locals used them as makeshift shelters during storms. These were the Argoli, ancestors of today's Marco Polo sheep, whose curved horns could span over 5 feet, an evolutionary masterpiece forged by the mountain's harsh rules. What's often overlooked is the silent genius of those who thrived here. Polo documented how Pamiri guides chewed bitter herbs to stave off altitude sickness, a primitive precursor to modern remedies. They navigated by reading the language of glaciers, cracks signaling unstable paths, ice textures hinting at hidden streams. Every survival tactic, from layering yak wool under tunics to timing ascents with the sun's warmth, was hard-won knowledge passed down through generations. This wasn't just a crossing, it was a masterclass in adaptation, proving that even the most unforgiving landscapes could be negotiated with patience and respect. Beyond the physical trials, Polo's account reveals something deeper: the Pamirs as a great equalizer. Here, silk merchants and warlords alike were reduced to the same shivering, wind-blown figures, their wealth meaningless against the mountain's indifference. Yet this very harshness knit diverse travelers together. Shared fires became impromptu markets of ideas where Persian astronomers debated Tibetan healers over cups of salted butter tea. The roof of the world wasn't just a barrier, it was a crucible forging connections between cultures who might never have met on level ground. Centuries later, scientists would confirm what Silk Road travelers intuited. The Pamirs are a living arc of biodiversity, where species evolved in isolation to create wonders like the Argali. But Polo's greatest contribution wasn't just recording these marvels, it was capturing the human spirit they inspired. His words remind us that progress has never been comfortable. Every exchange of goods, every shared innovation between East and West was earned through literal blood, sweat, and frozen breaths on a mountaintop. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of the Pamirs. The paths that shape history are rarely the easy ones. Descending from the icy grip of the Pamirs, Marco Polo's journey took an unexpected turn, not on land, but through whispered tales carried by sailors in smoky portside taverns. These were stories of an island shimmering on the eastern horizon, a place so wealthy its rulers paved palaces with gold. Though Polo himself never set foot there, his account of Zipangu, medieval Europe's first glimpse of Japan, would ripple through history with unintended consequences. What made these descriptions so tantalizing wasn't just their extravagance, but their specificity. Polo spoke of temples clad in gold leaf, a detail likely borrowed from Chinese traders who'd seen Japan's gilded Buddhist shrines. To Venetian ears, this transformed into a fantasy of entire cities built from precious metal, a misunderstanding that reveals how the silk warped facts as it stretched across continents. Yet there was a kernel of truth. Japan did possess rich gold deposits, mined as early as the 8th century. When Polo wrote of nobles eating from golden plates while commoners starved, he inadvertently captured the stark inequalities of Japan's feudal era, even as he inflated its opulence. The real power of Polo's Zipangu myth, though, lay in its afterlife. 2 centuries later, a Genos navigator named Columbus would dog-ear Polo's manuscript, scribbling frantic notes in its margins. To him, Zipangu wasn't just a destination, it was destiny. When Columbus stumbled upon the Caribbean in 1492, he insisted he'd reached Polo's Golden Island, dubbing its inhabitants Indios in his stubborn refusal to accept otherwise. The tragic irony, his miscalculation, born of Polo's second-hand tales, would alter the course of continents. This episode forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Exploration has always been driven as much by delusion as discovery. Polo's gold-clad Zipangu belonged to that peculiar category of medieval legends like El Dorado or the Fountain of Youth that proved more potent than reality. They weren't just stories, they were compass points for ambition, blurring the line between map and myth. Yet even in their inaccuracy, these tales had real-world teeth, propelling ships across uncharted oceans and empires into collision. What lingers isn't just the spectacle of the myth, but its mechanism. The Silk Road wasn't merely a conduit for goods, it was an echo chamber where details amplified with each retelling. A merchant's offhand remark about Kyoto's gilded pavilions became, in Venice, a rumor of streets paved with bullion. In an age without fact-checking, exaggeration was currency, and Polo unknowingly became its most influential broker. So was Zipangu a lie? Not exactly. It was a mosaic of truths, half-truths, and the human hunger for wonder. And in that, it's a mirror to our own era, where viral misinformation travels faster than any medieval caravan. Polo's Golden Island reminds us that history isn't just shaped by what is, but by what we believe could be, for better or often for worse. The Silk Road had shown Marco Polo countless wonders, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer scale of Kublai Khan's hunting expeditions, a breathtaking fusion of military precision and royal theater. Imagine a horizon alive with movement, 10,000 falconers in embroidered robes, regiments of archers on horseback, and leashed cheetahs draped in silk, their golden eyes scanning the grasslands. This wasn't merely a hunt, it was a choreographed spectacle designed to awe subjects and foreigners alike. Polo's accounts read like scenes from an epic. The Khan's entourage would sweep across the countryside in a living wave, driving everything from deer to tigers into carefully laid traps. His descriptions of cheetahs, trained to sprint from ox-drawn carts and bring down prey with lethal grace, left European readers skeptical. Yet these were no fables. Mongol rulers had perfected the art of symbolic conquest, using exotic animals to showcase their mastery over nature itself. The hunt served dual purposes, reinforcing the Khan's dominance while supplying his courts with enough meat to feed thousands for weeks. Beneath the grandeur, however, lay an ecological reckoning. The Khan's hunts weren't sustainable displays but calculated displays of excess. Entire forests were cleared to create hunting grounds, while species like the Caspian tiger, already rare, were pushed closer to extinction for sport. Polo, ever the keen observer, noted how Mongolian reverence for animals coexisted paradoxically with their ruthless exploitation. Falcons were prized companions, yet their training involved starvation to heighten aggression. Wolves, respected as ancestral spirits, were slaughtered en masse to protect livestock. What makes these expeditions so revealing isn't just their extravagance, but what they tell us about Mongol governance. The hunts mirrored the empire's military campaigns, vast, coordinated, and brutally efficient. By inviting Polo to participate, Kublai Khan wasn't just entertaining an outsider, he was demonstrating the machinery of his power. Every captured stag, every falcon's dive was a metaphor for Mongol rule. Nature, like nations, could be tamed. Yet Polo's writings also preserve quieter moments, the camaraderie around fires at night, the shared pride when a cheetah made a perfect kill. These glimpses remind us that beyond the propaganda, the hunts were a rare space where the Khan, his generals, and even a Venetian merchant could stand as equals in the thrill of the chase. In that balance of brutality and beauty, Polo captured the essence of Mongol culture, a civilization that saw no contradiction between loving the wild and bending it to its will. Leaving behind the opulence of Kublai Khan's court, Marco Polo's writings take a darker turn as his journey brings him to the shores of the Andaman Islands, a place where the line between compassion and horror blurred in ways that shocked even his worldly sensibilities. Here he claimed to encounter tribes who practiced what he called a mercy of the teeth, consuming their sick and elderly rather than watch them suffer. To medieval Europeans, this wasn't just a cultural difference, it was a descent into savagery. Polo's account drips with a mix of revulsion and morbid curiosity. He describes how islanders allegedly saw death as a release, interpreting the ritual as an act of love rather than brutality. What's fascinating, though, isn't whether his story was accurate. It almost certainly wasn't, but why such tales flourished along the Silk Road. Travelers, separated from home by thousands of miles, often filtered unfamiliar customs through their own fears and superstitions. A healer's herbal remedy might become sorcery. A funeral rite could morph into a cannibal feast. The further a story traveled, the more monstrous it grew, like a game of telephone spanning continents. Modern anthropology offers a less sensational truth. The Andaman Islanders, like many indigenous cultures, likely practiced endocannibalism, a ritual consumption of the dead to honor them, not unlike the Christian communion's symbolic act. But nuance rarely survived the journey back to Venice. Polo's version, likely cobbled together from sailors' yarns and third-hand accounts, became part of a broader medieval obsession with monstrous races at the world's edges. These myths weren't just entertainment, they justified conquest, framing foreign lands as places in need of civilizing. Yet there's an unsettling irony here. While Polo shuddered at the Andaman practices, Europe had its own brutal traditions, burning heretics alive, leaving the diseased to die in plague streets often framed as righteous. The real horror wasn't in the rituals themselves, but in how easily humans demonize what they don't understand. This episode reveals the Silk Road's shadow trade, not just spices and silk, but stories that reinforced us versus them divides. Polo, for all his open-mindedness, couldn't escape his era's prejudices. Yet his account, however flawed, forces us to confront a timeless question. When we encounter the unfamiliar, do we seek to learn or leap to judgment? The answer often writes history itself. After the unsettling tales of distant islands, Marco Polo's journey took him into the frozen reaches of Siberia, where he stumbled upon a material so baffling it seemed to laugh in the face of nature's rules. Local traders handed him a humble-looking cloth, tossed it into flames, and watched as it emerged unscathed. This wasn't magic, it was asbestos, a mineral Europeans would later call salamander wool, weaving it into legends as stubborn as its fibers. Polo's description of this fireproof marvel reveals a collision of worlds. To Mongol craftsmen, asbestos was practical, woven into napkins that could be cleansed in fire, or sewn into shields to deflect arrows tipped with burning pitch. Yet to Venetian eyes, such a substance couldn't belong to the earthly realm. Medieval bestiaries spoke of salamanders, creatures born in flames, whose mythical hides could extinguish fires. Polo, bridging observation and lore, suggested the cloth was spun from their hair, a poetic misunderstanding that endured for centuries. The irony here is delicious. While Europeans spun fables, societies across Eurasia had harnessed asbestos for millennia. Chinese alchemists lined ceremonial robes with it. Persian metalworkers used it as forge insulation. Even the Romans, despite knowing its toxicity, wove it into funeral shrouds for emperors, ensuring their ashes wouldn't mingle with ordinary fire. Polo's account, though flawed, captures a turning point. The moment when empirical evidence this cloth doesn't burn strained against stubborn myth, but salamanders aren't real. Beneath the surface lies a deeper lesson about the Silk Road's role as a laboratory of ideas. Asbestos wasn't just traded, it became a test case for how cultures process the inexplicable. Mongol traders shrugged and said, "It's a rock that burns forever." Persian scholars theorized about its cold flame properties. Polo, ever the diplomat, recorded every version without fully endorsing any. His ambiguity mirrors our own modern struggles when faced with something that upends our worldview. Do we dismiss it, mythologize it, or let it reshape what we think is possible? Today, we know asbestos as a cautionary tale, its once miraculous fibers now symbols of hubris. But Polo's encounter reminds us that every scientific revolution begins with a simple, unsettling observation. The world isn't working the way we thought. Whether it's fireproof cloth or quantum physics, progress often starts when someone dares to say, "This shouldn't exist, but here it is." And on the Silk Road, where cultures collided daily, such moments weren't exceptions, they were the very fabric of discovery. Leaving the fireproof mysteries of asbestos behind, Marco Polo's journey plunged him into the steamy jungles near Karakoram, where the trees whispered with more than just wine. Here he wrote of serpents so monstrous they could swallow a man whole, as a man might swallow a grain of rice. His words weren't just travelogue theatrics, they capture the sheer disorientation of encountering a world where nature defied every European expectation. The truth behind these giant serpents is as fascinating as the myth. Polo was likely describing encounters with reticulated pythons, creatures stretching over 20 feet, or perhaps freshwater crocodiles basking on muddy riverbanks. To a medieval Venetian, even a modest python would have seemed like a dragon. But what's revealing isn't just the exaggeration, it's why these tales spiraled into legend. Polo's contemporaries dismissed his accounts as fantasies, yet his descriptions align eerily with Southeast Asian folklore, where giant snakes guard sacred caves and shape-shifting Nagas rule underwater kingdoms. The Silk Road didn't just transport goods, it merged realities, blending observable fact with cultural myth until the two were inseparable. Dig deeper, and Polo's terror makes primal sense. Imagine stepping into a jungle where vines coil like waiting snakes, where every rustle could signal predator or prey. Without modern taxonomy, how would you explain a creature that swallows its meals alive? His accounts mirror humanity's oldest survival instinct, to magnify the unknown into something comprehensible, even if that means turning a python into a demon. This wasn't ignorance, it was cognitive dissonance writ large, the same impulse that painted "Here be dragons" on blank patches of maps also fueled Polo's serpent tales. Yet within these stories lies an unspoken truth about exploration's psychological toll. Polo's journals hint at nights spent jump-starting at every sound, at the exhausting hypervigilance required in ecosystems where danger wore scales instead of armor. His monsters weren't just wildlife, they were manifestations of the loneliness that came with being perpetually out of place. In this light, his serpent stories become something more poignant, a way to articulate the visceral unease of being a stranger in a land that follows none of your rules. Modern adventurers might smirk at Polo's alarm, armed as they are with field guides and satellite imagery, but his serpent tales endure because they tap into a universal truth. The most terrifying frontiers aren't on any map, but in the space between what we think we know and what lurks just beyond the firelight's edge. And sometimes the real discovery isn't the creature in the shadows, it's realizing how small and how brave we are when facing them. Here's the next segment of the script, designed to flow seamlessly after the previous section while maintaining engagement and depth. Amid the towering pagodas and grand canals of Hangzhou, Marco Polo found commerce thriving in the most unexpected place, not on land but on water itself. The floating markets of Kinsei modern-day Hangzhou weren't just a spectacle, they were a symphony of innovation where hundreds of boats transformed the city's waterways into a shimmering, ever-shifting marketplace. Picture the scene, vessels laden with silks from Suzhou, spices from Malacca, and freshwater pearls so luminous they rivaled moonlight, all bobbing gently as merchants haggled over baskets of lychees or steamed dumplings piping hot from onboard stoves. What struck Polo wasn't just the variety of goods, it was the rhythm of trade. Unlike the crowded, chaotic bazaars of Venice, these floating stalls operated with a fluid efficiency. Boats specialized by product, tea sellers drifted beside lacquerware artisans, while farmers' skiffs overflowed with lotus roots and water chestnuts. Polo noted how vendors used hooked poles to pull customers' boats closer, a dance of commerce that required no docks or roads. This wasn't just shopping, it was urban planning turned poetry, where every transaction flowed with the tide. Yet the market's true genius lay beneath the surface, literally. Hangzhou's canals weren't random waterways but part of a meticulously engineered network, dredged and maintained to prevent silt buildup. Polo marveled at sluice gates that regulated water levels, ensuring stalls could operate year-round, even during droughts. Such hydraulic mastery wasn't just about convenience, it was a lifeline for a city of over 1 million people, where a single day's market activity could involve thousands of boats. Beyond the mechanics, Polo's accounts capture the human heartbeat of these markets. He described chefs frying delicate pastries on narrow prows, their scents mingling with the tang of salted fish. Wealthy ladies bartered for embroidered robes from gondola showrooms, while children dangled their feet over boat edges, sucking on sugarcane sticks. In these details, the Silk Road stops feeling like a historical abstraction. and becomes something visceral, a place where people laughed, bargained, and shared meals between sales. This is where Polo's legacy shines brightest. While other travelers fixated on emperors and conquests, he recognized that trade's real power wasn't in silks or spices alone, but in the moments of connection they enabled. A Venetian merchant and a Hangzhou tea seller might not speak the same language, but they understood the universal grammar of a good deal, the shared delight in a rare pearl or a perfectly ripe melon. The floating markets weren't just a marvel of engineering. They were proof that commerce at its best doesn't just move goods, it brings worlds together. This segment avoids repetition by opening with an immersive scene rather than a transitional phrase, balancing technical details, hydraulic engineering with vivid human anecdotes, street food, children using varied descriptors, shimmering marketplace, dance of commerce, human heartbeat, closing on a thematic insight rather than a summary, linking trade to culture. Connection. If you thought express shipping was a modern luxury, wait until you hear about the Mongol Empire's medieval internet. The YAM, a postal network so efficient it could make today's logistics companies blush. Marco Polo's eyes widened in disbelief as he documented this system, describing relay stations stocked with fresh horses every 25 miles, messengers sprinting through blizzards, and even encrypted letters sealed with wax and coded symbols. This wasn't just mail delivery, it was a high-stakes information superhighway that bound the world's largest empire together. At the heart of this operation lay the Paser, a passport-like tablet that functioned as the ultimate VIP pass. Carved from gold, silver, or wood depending on rank, these tokens granted bearers access to fresh mounts, food, and lodging at any relay station. Polo noted how a courier flashing a golden Paser could commandeer resources on the spot, bypassing bureaucracy with imperial authority. But speed came with ruthless discipline. Messengers caught delaying faced dire penalties, ensuring urgent news like rebellions or invasions could traverse thousands of miles in days, not months. What truly set the YAM apart wasn't just its reach, over 300,000 horses and countless runners, but its adaptability. Polo described how messages were tailored for secrecy, some wrapped in silk and sewn into linings, others etched onto thin wooden slips that could be broken and reassembled like a puzzle. In an era when European kings waited weeks for scouts to return, the Mongols had mastered real-time communication, their riders weaving through mountain passes and deserts with near-identical efficiency. Yet the system's brilliance extended beyond speed. These relay hubs doubled as intelligence nodes where scouts and spies exchanged whispers alongside official dispatches. A merchant's rumor about unrest in Persia might reach the Khan before local governors even knew it existed. Polo realized this wasn't just about letters, it was about control. By monopolizing information flow, the Mongols didn't just rule territory, they ruled time itself, staying steps ahead of rivals. The YAM's legacy lingers in surprising ways. Modern emergency courier systems, diplomatic pouches, even blockchain's tamper-proof logic echo its principles. But Polo's takeaway was more profound. The Silk Road thrived not just because of brave travelers, but because empires invested in the paths between them. Infrastructure, he saw, was the silent scaffolding of history, and 7 centuries later, as satellites zip data across skies, we're still catching up to the Khan's ambition. Key tactics to avoid repetition. Opener, launched with a playful contrast between modern and medieval tech instead of a transitional phrase. Terminology, varied descriptors, information superhighway, real-time communication, intelligence nodes to keep concepts fresh. Structure broke down the YAM's mechanics, Paser, encryption, penalties before zooming out to geopolitical implications. Ending, linked ancient innovation to modern systems without summarizing, leaving viewers with a forward-looking insight. Tone mixed ore make today's logistics companies blush with crisp analysis, monopolizing information flow. This approach ensures novelty while deepening the narrative, proving even a postal system can be an adventure. After centuries of Mongol postal networks and floating markets, Marco Polo's journey took a turn that would have made any medieval European aristocrat clutch their pearls. A kingdom where women ruled and men, in his words, lived as servants. This wasn't just another traveler's tall tale. It was a glimpse into the matriarchal societies of the Himalayas, where power structures flipped Polo's world upside down. His descriptions of this so-called land of women read like something from a feminist fable: queens leading armies, inheritance passing through daughters, and marriages where husbands visited their wives' homes under cover of darkness. While Polo likely exaggerated for shock value, his account dripping with a mix of awe and discomfort, modern anthropologists recognize kernels of truth. The Mosuo people of southwestern China, often called the Kingdom of Women, have preserved a matrilineal system for over 2 millennia. Here, property and family names follow the maternal line, and romantic relationships are fluid, free from traditional marriage bonds. What's fascinating isn't just the existence of such societies, but how Polo's telling reveals the limits of medieval European imagination. To a Venetian raised on rigid patriarchy, the idea of female rulers wasn't just unusual, it was unnatural. Yet along the Silk Road, where cultures collided daily, alternative ways of organizing life weren't radical. They were simply facts. Tibetan nomads, kitten warrior queens, even Mongol noblewomen like Sorgatoni, who outmaneuvered male rivals to secure power for her sons, all offered living counterpoints to Europe's gendered hierarchies. The real twist: Polo's account may have been garbled, but it wasn't entirely wrong. Societies like the Mosuo didn't just challenge norms, they thrived because of them. With men often away trading or herding, women became de facto stewards of land, law, and lineage. Their walking marriages, where partners never cohabitate, weren't scandalous but pragmatic, ensuring economic stability and reducing familial conflict. To dismiss Polo's tale as pure fantasy misses the deeper truth. The Silk Road didn't just trade goods, it trafficked in ideas, including radical visions of equality that still echo today. Perhaps the most subversive part of this legend isn't its exoticism, but its ordinariness. For the Mosuo, matriarchy wasn't a utopian experiment, it was just how things work. Polo's shock says more about his world than there's a reminder that history's most transformative stories aren't always about conquests or gold, but about the quiet revolutions hiding in plain sight, waiting for a traveler bold enough to see them. Fresh techniques applied, opener contrasted with previous segments, pearl-clutching aristocrats vs. Mongol logistics for novelty. Perspective shift analyzed Polo's bias and the real-world Mosuo, offering dual insight. Thematic link tied gender norms to broader Silk Road exchanges of ideas, not just goods. Closing insight ended on quiet revolutions, avoiding summary or cliché. Tone balanced scholarly rigor, matrilineal system with playful phrasing, feminist fable. This approach ensures the segment feels new while deepening the narrative, proving even a 700-year-old travelogue can spark conversations about power, perception, and progress. After the dizzying heights of the Pamirs and the whispers of matriarchal kingdoms, Marco Polo's journey brought him to the sun-drenched shores of Sri Lanka, where the ocean's treasures came at a haunting human cost. Here he watched as pearl divers plunged into turquoise waters with nothing but a knife and a prayer, their lungs burning as they scraped oysters from the seabed for Kublai Khan's insatiable treasury. What seemed like a merchant's ledger entry: pearls, X weight, Y value, hid a world of sacrifice beneath its gloss. Polo's account strips away the romance. These weren't leisurely swimmers but bound laborers, some shackled to prevent escape, others indentured by debt. The diver's technique was brutal in its simplicity. Weighted stones dragged them to the depths where they worked blindly, fingers bleeding as they pried shells from rock. The real terror came during ascent, when the body's cry for air clashed with the need to fill quotas. Polo noted how survivors celebrated with palm wine, while the drowned were buried silently on the shore, a ledger of loss written in unmarked graves. Yet amid this exploitation, Polo captured something unexpected: the divers' rituals. Before each plunge, they invoked Hindu gods and Muslim saints alike, tying sacred threads around their wrists. Offerings of coconuts and rice were tossed into the waves, not just for safety, but to soften the ocean's greed. Even in bondage, these moments revealed a stubborn humanity, a belief that the sea might spare the vulnerable if asked kindly. This duality is the Silk Road's untold heart. For every pearl that adorned a Mongol crown or Venetian necklace, there were calloused hands and shattered eardrums. Polo, often dazzled by luxury, paused here to document the arithmetic of exploitation. How many oysters yielded a single pearl? How many dives broke a body? How little pay bought so much risk? His notes force us to confront an uncomfortable truth: the medieval world's glitter was built on systems that valued shimmer over lives. Modern parallels are hard to ignore. From diamond mines to sweatshops, the gap between luxury and labor remains as vast as the Indian Ocean those divers crossed. Polo's account does more than chronicle history. It holds up a mirror, asking who today's unseen divers are and what pearls we're willing to ignore in their depths. As Marco Polo's caravan wound its way back toward Europe, his journals filled with tales of a place where the very laws of nature seemed inverted. A land so far north that winter erased the sun itself. Traders whispered of the land of darkness, where months passed without daylight, where people navigated by starlight and harnessed antlered beasts to sleds that glided soundlessly over snow. To Mediterranean ears, it sounded less like geography and more like myth. Yet these weren't mere fantasies. They were Europe's first glimpses of the Arctic, filtered through the lens of the Silk Road's vast rumor mill. What's striking about Polo's account isn't just its vividness, but its eerie accuracy in places. His descriptions of reindeer-drawn sleds align perfectly with Sami and Nenet's traditions, where indigenous peoples had mastered Arctic travel centuries before European explorers. The sunless winters, he reported, a dead-on portrayal of the polar night above the Arctic Circle. Even his mention of fur-clad hunters trading pelts for iron mirrors echoes real-life commerce between Siberian tribes and Mongol traders. Polo never set foot in the Arctic. His details were likely cobbled together from fur trappers and Mongol scouts, but his retelling proves how far indigenous knowledge traveled along Silk Road networks. Dig deeper, and this segment reveals a quiet revolution in medieval thought. Before Polo, most European maps labeled the far north as a frozen wasteland of monsters. But his dispatches painted something radically different: a livable, if harsh, world where societies thrived on ingenuity. When he wrote of people using reindeer milk and blood as food staples, or stitching waterproof boots from sealskin, he wasn't just sharing curiosities, he was documenting survival strategies refined over millennia. These weren't primitive customs, they were masterclasses in adaptation, challenging Europe's assumptions about civilization's boundaries. The real magic lies in how these tales migrated. A Sami reindeer herder's technique shared around a Mongol campfire might become a merchant's anecdote in Bukhara, then a scribe's note in Venice. Each retelling added layers, yes, but also preserved core truths. Polo's Land of Darkness wasn't just a story. It was a testament to oral history's endurance, proving that even the most distant cultures could shape global understanding when connected by trade's invisible threads. Today, as climate change reshapes the Arctic, Polo's words take on new resonance. The indigenous knowledge he glimpsed, predicting weather by wind patterns, tracking migrations through ice cracks, is now recognized as essential science. 7 centuries ago, the Silk Road carried fragments of this wisdom to a skeptical world. The irony, it took us until the 21st century to realize how much those tall tales got right. Key techniques to avoid repetition. Opener, launched with a sensory contrast: sunlit Europe vs sunless Arctic instead of a time-based transition. Structure alternated between Polo's observations, what he described, and their implications, why they mattered. Perspective balanced Polo's limited viewpoint with modern recognition of indigenous knowledge. Closing ended with a contemporary twist: climate relevance rather than summarizing Polo's journey. Tone mixed or glided soundlessly over snow with analytical insight, challenging Europe's assumptions. This approach keeps the narrative fresh while honoring the Silk Road's role as history's original internet, where even the farthest edges of the world could whisper their truths to those willing to listen. Stepping onto India's Malabar coast, Marco Polo was engulfed in an intoxicating storm of aromas, where the very air tasted of adventure. Mountains of black peppercorns spilled from woven baskets, while cinnamon bark curled like scrolls holding ancient secrets. This wasn't just trade, it was alchemy, where humble seeds and barks transformed into fortunes capable of toppling kings. Polo's journals practically tremble with sensory overload as he describes the spice markets of Calicut, laborers sifting turmeric into golden dunes, merchants testing cloves by pressing them to their tongues until they tingled numb. His account reveals how spices weren't merely commodities, but living characters in human history. Pepper vines twisting up jungle trees became the reason Roman legions marched and Dutch empires rose. A pinch of nutmeg could buy a Venetian sailor's year's wages, while cardamom's citrusy warmth made it the medieval equivalent of bottled sunshine. But beyond their luxury, Polo captured something revolutionary: how these spices rewrote medicine. Ayurvedic healers taught him formulas where ginger stoked digestion like internal firewood, while sandalwood paste cooled fevers better than European bloodletting. European apothecaries would later dismiss these practices as pagan magic, yet Polo noted how Malabar's spice blends treated everything from battle wounds to melancholy with eerie precision. The real treasure wasn't in spice chests, but in the knowledge of how to use them, a secret Silk Road traders guarded as fiercely as their cargo. The market's brutal economics also come into sharp focus. Polo describes children scrambling for fallen peppercorns under merchant stalls, their fingers stained yellow from endless sorting. Mountains of cinnamon bark came at a cost, workers scaling perilous cliffs in monsoon rains to peel it from wild trees, their arms laced with scars from protective thorns. For every gilded feast spiced in Baghdad or Paris, there were calloused hands that made it possible. What lingers longest from Polo's account isn't just the spices themselves, but how they warped reality. Ships braved sea monsters for them, maps were redrawn around them, and palates once content with salted meat suddenly craved the impossible. When Polo wrote of biting into a Malabar chili like swallowing embers, he wasn't just describing heat. He was documenting the moment the medieval world realized there were flavors beyond imagination, waiting where the Silk Road met the sea. Fresh techniques applied. Opener dropped viewers directly into sensory immersion, air tasted of adventure, rather than transitional narration. Perspective layers balanced economic impact, medical use, and human cost without repetition. Key detail highlighted Polo's personal reaction: chili as swallowing embers, to ground the exotic in visceral experience. Closing twist ended on philosophical shift. Spices triggered not just their monetary value, language variety, used alchemy, bottled sunshine, and living characters to avoid repetitive descriptors. This segment transforms a simple trade good into a multi-sensory pivot point of history. proving even a peppercorn could tilt the world's axis when viewed through Polo's astonished eyes. After years of traversing deserts and dynasties, Marco Polo finally glimpsed the familiar canals of Venice in 1295, only to walk straight into another kind of wilderness. The city that had once been his home now felt foreign, his Venetian tongue stumbling over forgotten phrases, his stories of paper money and coal met with outright laughter. Then, as if fate needed one last twist, war erupted between Venice and Genoa, and the world's most celebrated traveler found himself shackled in a prison cell. Ironically, this confinement became his greatest liberation. With nothing but time and a curious cellmate, a romance writer named Rustichello da Polo did something revolutionary. He spoke his truth aloud. Night after night, Rustichello's quill scratched across parchment as Polo's memories unspooled not as dry facts, but as vivid tales of levitating sorcerers in Tibet, Burmese elephants draped in golden armor, and Chinese cities where waste paper became sacred currency. The result, The Travels of Marco Polo, a book that would outlive empires. Here's what's often overlooked: this wasn't just a travelogue, it was an act of defiance. Venetian merchants dismissed his accounts as lunacy. No one burns black rocks, while scholars scoffed at descriptions of Asian cities dwarfing European capitals. Yet Polo's prison time storytelling followed an almost cinematic structure: cliffhangers, humor, even self-deprecating asides about his own culture shock. He wasn't writing for dusty libraries, he was crafting the medieval equivalent of a binge-worthy series. The real magic lies in how wrong his skeptics were. Columbus carried a dog-eared copy of Polo's book on his voyage, scrawling notes in margins about Zipangu's gold. Mercator used it to sketch early world maps. Even Polo's exaggerations, like the rock bird, proved to be distorted truths, echoes of real animals and places seen through the lens of oral storytelling. His lies were often just lost in translation moments, where a Sumatran rhinoceros became a unicorn, or a Tibetan yak's shaggy coat morphed into a mythical beast. Perhaps the greatest irony, the man who'd crossed deserts and dined with khans needed prison stillness to make his journey matter. Stripped of movement, he discovered the power of words, how ink on a page could transport readers farther than any caravan. And in that damp Genoa cell, An Imposter's Tale became the founding text of global exploration, proving that sometimes you need to be caged to truly set the world free. Fresh techniques applied: opener, contrasted homecoming joy with immediate displacement, emotional whiplash effect, narrative twist, framed imprisonment as creative liberation rather than tragedy, cultural insight, highlighted how Polo's fiction bridged medieval and modern cartography, closing metaphor, ended with the paradox of captivity enabling legacy, no summary tone blend. Scholarly analysis, oral storytelling distortions with playful phrasing, a binge-worthy series. This segment reframes Polo's final adventure as his most enduring, not a journey across land, but through the alchemy of memory and storytelling. Final segment: after 24 years of crossing deserts, scaling mountains, and stepping into worlds beyond imagination, Marco Polo's greatest legacy wasn't the treasures he brought home, it was the stories that refused to be silenced. Think about it, a lone Venetian merchant's account of paper money and coal once sounded like pure fantasy, yet today we live in a world built on those very innovations. His journey wasn't just about places, it was about possibility, proving that the most extraordinary discoveries often begin as heresies. What makes these 20 adventures timeless isn't just their spectacle, though who could forget the assassin's mountain fortress or the ghostly whispers of the Desert of Lop? It's how they reveal the Silk Road's hidden truth. Commerce wasn't just about silk and spices. It was people traders haggling in floating markets, scholars debating under lamplight, soldiers sharing survival tricks, stitching together a tapestry of cultures that still shapes our world. Polo's genius lay in his willingness to look closer. Where others saw barbarians, he found ingenuity. Kublai Khan's postal system outpacing Europe's messengers, Chinese engineers taming rivers with locks and canals, Himalayan tribes redefining power. His tall tales were often just truths too bold for his era to swallow. And isn't that the heart of exploration? Not just charting new lands, but daring to see familiar ones with fresh eyes. So here's the real question these adventures leave us with. What myths are we dismissing today that future generations will accept as obvious? The next time you hold a banknote or light a gas stove, remember someone once called that impossible too. Polo's world reminds us that history's most transformative ideas rarely arrive with fanfare. They slip in quietly, carried on the wind like the songs of distant dunes, waiting for curious minds to listen. Your turn now. Which of these 20 adventures reshaped your view of the past? Drop your favorite in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this journey through time, hit subscribe to join us for the next one. Because as any Silk Road traveler knew, the best stories aren't just told, they're passed onward, gathering new meaning with every retelling. Key techniques applied. Opener began with a conceptual twist, legacy as stories, not objects, rather than recapping adventure's narrative thread. Connected Polo's skepticism, defying observations to modern parallels, banknotes, energy use, call to action. Framed engagement as part of a historical tradition of passing stories, avoiding generic prompts, closing mood, ended on a forward-looking communal note instead of summarizing content, tone balance, mixed intellectual insight, tapestry of cultures, with warmth. Your turn now. This finale reframes Polo's journey as an invitation, not just to marvel at the past, but to question our own assumptions, keeping the adventure alive long after the screen fades to black.